What's a good word, everyone? It's your boy DKB here. I just want to say thanks for all the support. The channel's been steadily growing, and the number you see below, you can drop a text, shoot a voicemail, any ideas, topics, collabs, etc. you guys want to see. I'll include them in future videos and live streams, and I'll catch you again. Be easy.
What's a good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here. I honestly tried to make it into at least Thanksgiving, but 2-9 record, trade deadline pass, barring some more standout performances. Not going to be a ton of talk about from a Jets perspective other than up and down candidates, stock up, stock down candidate type stuff, progress reports, coaching staff. Still a ton of things, but nothing, ultimately exciting, right? It's more kind of mental thought processes and how people evaluate what this team is going to be going into next year. But the first mock draft that I happened to come across was a recent one. And I know there's been others so far, the Jets being in the top 5 most likely in terms of draft picks. It definitely helps. Having a multitude of picks in the top 100 definitely helps with keeping things fresh. I know I seen Jet Central drop a Matt Miller mock draft breakdown, something like that a little while ago. So I'm excited to finally be able to get into a lot of this stuff and look at it myself. But going back to this draft, this mock draft that I saw, Nick Baumgardner of The Athletic released the top 10 2026 NFL mock draft, and they had the Jets, or he had the Jets selecting Caleb Downs with the 3rd overall pick. So one, I get the sentiment that he probably simulated the rest of the season and or had some level of analytics that says this is the most likely draft slot for the New York Jets. All gravy, right? Now, Caleb Downs, a very, very interesting name, right? I think is one that is few and far in between mocked to the Jets up until this point. It's not a favorite. I don't even think there'd be a lot of fanfare around this one for a multitude of reasons that we'll get into. But one of the important things to point out here is that the two teams ahead of us, there wasn't a quarterback picked for one, and two, Arvell Reese was off of the board, right? Because I think that's going to be the odds-on favorite for us to get our hands on if he somehow lands to us. But this brought up an interesting subject to me before we even get into the specifics of Caleb Downs is, can the Jets afford to go and select a player at any non-premium type position, or even one where it feels like maybe we can wait, right? The 4 that come to mind, linebacker. You think of guys like Arvell Reese, and I throw his name in there as a fan favorite right now because even among analysts, many people feel like Reese as a pass rusher is a ferocious monster, right? I don't think anybody's slapping generational tabs on him, but he is a player that feels like he could end up being one of the best at his position when it's all said and done, maybe even by the time his rookie contract is up. And then Sonny Styles, another guy that I think people are evaluating highly, but again, how much bang for your buck can you really get if you're the New York Jets selecting at that position? You look at running back, Jeremiah Love would be the go-to there. You take a look at the background with someone like Tanner Engstrand, someone like Aaron Glenn. You saw what they did with Jahmyr Gibbs. You see what Jahmyr Gibbs is still continuing to do. And so there's an argument to be made that combining him with Breece Hall and getting your David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs type duo would be huge. Now, what does that mean for Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis, etc.? You trade one of those guys off, assumedly, and you feel really, really good about whoever ends up sliding into RB3 while picking up some extra resources. Not really a road that I want to travel, but Jermon McCoy at cornerback would make sense as well if this team feels like they need someone that can create turnovers, right? It's the one single thing we don't have on our roster right now. 11 weeks into the season, history made by the Jets, 0 interceptions whatsoever. Pretty unfathomable if you actually think about the amount of passes that we've probably seen at this point in the season and the lack of ability to force the ball. And it's not like we haven't even been close, right? There were 2 just in the Patriots game, I believe it was, where Quantez Diggers might have been able to come down with 2 separate ones, right? And it seems like everybody's kind of frantic. Everybody is losing the communication. Everybody's trying to force the issue of making a play, which is ultimately making it even harder for the New York Jets. But the final position and what loops us back into this conversation, safety. Caleb Downs again being the pick here. So here's the excerpt that Baumgardner wrote up for Caleb Downs of why he would be the pick. The Jets need everything. So although Downs, a safety by trade who can play corner, slot, or even sub linebacker, might scare people from a positional value standpoint, he is still my favorite player, pound for pound in the class. He's a potential culture changer, right? Now, you can read that and you can fall in love with it if you've been following Caleb Downs for a long time, right? NFL bloodlines, obviously, has just been killing it at a DB factory with Ohio State. Maybe factory is the right way to put it, but still, they tend to just turn out quality talent year after year after year. Is Caleb Downs going to be the missing piece, right? Is he going to be a X factor when it comes to forcing turnovers on the ground, through the air, right? You would almost, selecting someone like Caleb Downs will almost be setting himself up for failure, because if he doesn't become like an Ed Reed caliber safety, then you're going to feel like you wasted the pick, especially consider who may be on the board, and of course, whatever developments may happen after players in the same vicinity get drafted that we could have took instead, right? So from that standpoint, I'm not saying that's a reason not to pick a guy, but that's just kind of the expectations that would essentially end up coming along with him, right? And I don't know a ton about Caleb Downs outside of some of the obvious stuff, but I'm not even aware of if he's necessarily a turnover machine versus being more of like a tone setter, a LaRon Landry type guy, right? Obviously not the same type of build, but just in terms of that enforcer mode, that's what I mean. If anything, you can try to find someone like that in essentially any round, right? Enforcer's a little bit harder to come by, but definitely much easier to acquire, even if it's just from a mentality standpoint of how someone plays, as opposed to someone that can legitimately be the reason why you have a plus-minus turnover differential, right? Game-changing moments that can really help keep you in control of your own destiny if you're a team. Now, if you're a Jets fan, right, and you see Caleb Downs being the pick here, you're going to flash back to Jamal Adams. Jamal Adams, to me, remembering him in green and white, black and green Jets uniforms, he was a absolute monster, right? A lot of people, I feel like, based on the way that he forced himself out of the Jets and based on how his career kind of careened off once he left us, due to injury, and then of course aging caught up to him. He just was never quite the same player. But Jamal Adams, in his glory days with the Jets, was a beast. Not only was he an enforcer, this was a guy that was known to be able to get after the quarterback, get after the running back, basically lived in the backfield. And he did pretty much live around the ball, right? Was he turning it over at a ridiculous rate or anything? No, but I honestly feel like he galvanized the back seven. He gave juice to the front seven with his ability to pressure the quarterback. And overall, he really was one of the best leaders of a defensive unit that we've seen in a long, long time. And I would argue definitely there was a bit of a culture change while he was there. Did it ultimately lead to winning? No, but that had more to do with the offense than anything. That is Jamal Adams' fault. And that in and of itself would be the reason why many people would say Caleb Downs can't be the pick, right? If we were in a different part of our rebuild and just so happened to have been picking this high, right? Whether it was a pick that we acquired or it was our own natural selection in a bad season, this would be a different story. But with so many necessary pieces on the board, I don't know if you can go any of the positions I mentioned: linebacker, running back, cornerback, safety. Now, the counter argument to this is when you're a team as bad as the New York Jets, you need as many elite leaders as you can get, and you just need as many talented players as possible that you can get, right? And I'm all for that conversation, but there's also a strategic way about how you want to build a team up, and there's a reason why certain positions are deemed not premium positions, even if there are highly impactful players. But again, those guys come few and far in between. That is your Ed Reeds, that's your Cam Chancellors, that's your Jamal Adams, that's your boy from the Chargers, brain freeze. But it's hard to justify like a top 5, in this case a top 3 safety pick. Now, does this mean it's impossible? No, we've already seen that Aaron Glenn and company have an affinity for bringing in defensive backs and going hunting for these guys, right? They're also not opposed to these big projects. Take a look at Brandon Stevens, for example. I think at some point we've had at now probably over a dozen and a half, maybe 2 dozen defensive backs between cornerback and safety that we brought in. Doesn't mean that we've signed or done much with any of these guys, but we are continuously doing our homework week after week after week after week. So I would be excited for this pick either way, right? This isn't like you're saying we're taking a safety just for the sake of taking the safety because he happens to be the best available player on the board. To some degree, and even still ongoing, Caleb Downs was the number 1 rated prospect going into 2026 in terms of these draft eligible type guys. And at worst, maybe he slipped to being somewhere in the top 10 still, right? So you are talking about still getting an elite guy here. And if we were to dig deep, I'm sure you could come up with many stats, tons of film, and many analogies to show why we should fall in love with a guy like this. But in a world where, again, no quarterbacks have been taken to this point, it's pretty much free reign. Quarterback makes a ton of sense that we need. Wide receiver, you can make a ton of sense, makes more sense of what we need. If there is an Arvell Reese or someone else that you feel extremely comfortable with that's going to be playing more of a edge role for us and kind of knocking either Will McDonald or Jermaine Johnson into more of that edge 2 type guy and not a 1A, 1B type situation. Awesome, right? You are talking about someone that would theoretically have a higher ceiling than either one of these guys, or at least allow them to play a role that more suits them. I'd be all for it. Well, we'll ultimately see what plans out, right? But let me know what you guys think. Caleb Downs being the pick as the 3rd overall selection for the New York Jets. And I'll catch you guys again. Peace.